On August 15, 79 AD, a young woman named Sabina stood in absolute darkness beneath the Colosseum, her wrists bound in iron, listening to 50,000 Roman voices screaming above her head. They were celebrating the gladiator who had just killed her brothers in the arena. She had no way of knowing that what awaited her in the next 3 hours would become one of ancient Rome's most deliberately erased practices, a ritual so disturbing that even Roman historians themselves would argue for centuries about whether it should ever be written down at all. This is the story that Roman senators tried to burn from every record, the reward system that transformed arena champions into something far worse than killers. And before we descend into those underground chambers where the crowd never looked, understand this: what you're about to hear isn't legend or exaggeration. This comes directly from the accounts of Cassius Dio, confirmed by excavations conducted in 2018 beneath the Colosseum's eastern section, and supported by Senate documents discovered in the Vatican archives. This was policy, not chaos. This was entertainment, not accident. The Colosseum wasn't merely a stadium, it was Rome's declaration of absolute dominance. Completed just 1 year earlier in 80 AD, large enough to hold the population of a small city, the air inside reeked of rust, sweat, and the stench of caged animals waiting in the darkness below. The sand covering the arena floor wasn't decorative, it was functional, designed to absorb whatever poured from dying men and beasts. Beneath that blood-soaked sand stretched a labyrinth of tunnels and cells, holding Rome's most valuable currency: the condemned, the captured, the conquered. Gladiator games served multiple purposes simultaneously. They were political theater, religious ceremony, and psychological warfare combined into a single spectacle. When General Marcus Antonius crushed the Dacian rebellion in 78 AD, he returned with more than gold and land. He brought back 847 prisoners, including 124 noblewomen. These weren't peasants or commoners, they were chieftains' daughters, priestesses, warriors' wives, women who had held power and respect in their own societies. Rome understood that defeating an enemy's army wasn't enough. True conquest required the complete destruction of their symbols, the corruption of their values, and the public humiliation of those they had once protected. The message had to be unmistakable. Resisting Rome was futile, and losing to Rome meant losing everything, including dignity itself. That afternoon, the victor stood waiting for his prize. Gaius Valerius Maximus, 32 years old, towered at nearly 6 feet tall, enormous by Roman standards. His body was a living map of violence. Every scar represented a fight survived, a life ended, a crowd satisfied. Born into slavery after his father died in debtor's prison, Gaius had spent 14 years killing to stay alive. 89 men had died by his hand in official combat. His only dream was earning the wooden sword of freedom, the rudis. His greatest fear was dying anonymously, dragged from the arena on meat hooks like countless others before him. But on this day, he had defeated the Dacian champion directly in front of Emperor Titus himself. His reward followed standard protocol: 500 denarii, a laurel wreath, and first selection among the captive women. What happened next would spark a crisis that would reach the Senate floor within weeks, forcing Rome's most powerful men to publicly acknowledge a practice everyone knew existed but nobody ever named aloud. Because Gaius Valerius Maximus was about to do something unthinkable, something that would expose the machinery of Rome's cruelty in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away. And it started in a small stone chamber, with a door that locked only from the outside, where a young woman waited in the dark, praying only for a death that would come with some shred of dignity intact. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as shadows began creeping across the blood-stained sand above, the master of games descended into the Hypogeum, the underground complex beneath the Colosseum. The corridor reeked of damp stone and human fear. He approached Gaius Valerius Maximus with a bronze tablet listing the available rewards. Gaius's hands still trembled from battle, adrenaline still burning through his veins. "The emperor honors your victory," the official announced in a flat, bureaucratic tone. "By imperial tradition, you are entitled to the spoils of conquest. Choose." Nobody present understood that this routine selection, repeated hundreds of times before across the empire, was about to become a scandal. The tablet offered the standard options: gold, wine, a night in proper quarters, or what Roman law classified as victoria carnalis, the carnal privilege granted to victors. For a man who owned nothing and could be killed on a whim, this represented one of the few moments he held any power whatsoever. Roman society didn't merely permit this practice, it celebrated it as natural order. The conquered existed to satisfy the conqueror. That logic had been perfected over generations of imperial expansion. If you've made it this far into this story, if you're still listening as we pull back the curtain on what Rome tried to hide, then hit that subscribe button. Because history isn't just about the monuments that survived, it's about the voices that were silenced, the rooms that were sealed, and the truths that were deliberately erased. And there are more stories like this one, stories that need to be told, that deserve to be remembered. So subscribe, because someone has to bear witness to what happened in the dark. Meanwhile, in the women's holding area, a different kind of preparation was underway. Guards arrived with buckets of water, not for drinking, but for washing the prisoners. The women were scrubbed down, their hair combed, their torn clothing replaced with plain tunics. Sabina watched the attendants move systematically from one woman to the next, inspecting them, marking details on wax tablets. An older woman named Zamolxis, once a priestess in the Dacian Sun Temple, whispered what they all feared. They're preparing us, either for the show or for what comes after. 20 Dacian women were lifted to the arena through the underground elevator system, an engineering marvel designed to send animals, fighters, and condemned prisoners erupting through trapdoors. Sabina stepped out into scorching sunlight and an explosion of sound. The roar of 50,000 voices felt like a physical blow. She could smell roasting meat from food vendors, heavy perfume drifting down from the wealthy sections, and beneath it all, the metallic scent of dried blood baking in the August heat. What should have been a straightforward execution had been transformed into calculated theater. The women were lined up as a herald announced their supposed crimes: rebellion, aiding enemies, refusing Roman gods. Then came the twist that made this day different from countless others. They would be forced to fight each other in pairs using wooden swords, dressed in deliberately shredded clothing designed to mock and expose them. The winners would be claimed by Rome's champions. The losers would die immediately. Sabina gripped the rough wooden sword, feeling splinters dig into her palm. Across from her stood Comescos, the sister of Decebalus, the woman who had once taught her to weave and who had sung at her engagement ceremony months before the Romans came. Their eyes met. The crowd screamed for blood. The master of games raised his hand and dropped it. Neither woman moved. The roar shifted. Excitement transformed into confusion, then into rage. Fight. The crowd howled. Cowards. Barbarians. Objects began raining down. Olive pits, food scraps, whatever spectators had within reach. Still, the women stood motionless. It was the only resistance left to them. Refusal. For 90 full seconds, the greatest empire on earth was publicly defied by two unarmed women standing perfectly still. Then the guards stormed in and the performance dissolved into actual violence. Comescos was struck from behind, collapsing onto the sand. Sabina screamed and rushed toward her, dropping her wooden sword. Both were dragged away, not to execution, but to something the audience found equally entertaining. In the chambers below, the bureaucratic machinery of Roman exploitation continued without pause. A scribe made a notation in the official record. 20 female captives, Dacian origin, processed for post-victory allocation. 2 resistors transferred to private chambers for champion exclusive use. Sabina and Comescos were separated, each taken to different rooms. Small stone chambers with benches, iron rings embedded in the walls, and doors that locked only from the outside. They were clean, organized, and absolutely terrifying precisely because everything had been planned. These weren't improvised dungeons. These rooms were part of the Colosseum's original design, as intentional as the lion cages and gladiator lifts. At 4 o'clock, Gaius Valerius Maximus entered Sabina's chamber. The door opened and their eyes met. He still wore his full arena gear. Someone else's blood streaked across his chest. She stood cornered against the far wall, exhausted and unarmed. Between them stood the full weight of Roman law. He possessed complete legal authority. She had absolutely none. History doesn't record what Gaius thought in that moment. Did he see a person, or did he see property? Did he question the system that had transformed him into both weapon and prisoner? All we know comes from a clerk's routine report, not from either of them. Then something extraordinary happened. Gaius removed his helmet, set his sword aside, and sat down with his head in his hands. For 5 long minutes, he said nothing. Sabina remained frozen, bracing for violence that never came. Finally, he spoke in broken Dacian, a language he had learned from other captives over the years. What was his name? He asked quietly. Mine, she replied, confused. No, he said. The man they made you watch die. Decebalus, she whispered. No, he corrected, the one from today. She shook her head, not understanding. He sighed heavily. I killed a Decebalus today, could be family. Your people use that name often. What followed wasn't the assault that Rome expected and had architecturally planned for. It was a conversation between 2 human beings that the empire had tried desperately to strip of every shred of humanity. Gaius told her about his father, executed for debt when he was 9 years old. Sabina explained how Roman soldiers had burned her village while she watched from the hills. 2 hours passed. Guards checked twice, heard voices, assumed compliance, and continued their rounds. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Gaius Valerius Maximus made the decision that Rome would never forgive him for. He stood, walked to the chamber door, and called for the guard. This woman is infected, he declared loudly. Diseased, I refuse the allocation. Send her to the physician immediately. It was the only loophole the arena system allowed. If a captive was labeled diseased, a gladiator could legally reject her and return her to general prisoner status. The lie was transparent. The guard recognized it instantly. But Roman bureaucracy operated on rigid procedure. Challenging a gladiator's choice meant paperwork, witnesses, and a formal inquiry. Accepting the rejection took seconds, and so Sabina was removed, taken to the medical holding section. Her immediate fate had changed. She still died 3 days later from an infection, the most common killer in Roman captivity. The medical unit was overcrowded, filthy, and indifferent. The mercy that had spared her from one horror delivered her directly into another. Gaius never saw her again. He fought twice more that month, won both bouts, and refused his rewards both times. Whispers spread through the gladiator barracks. Maximus had gone soft. Maximus had joined one of those strange Eastern cults. Maximus had been cursed, but the truth was simpler and more dangerous. He had remembered what it meant to be human, and that memory was contagious. On September 15, 79 AD, Senator Quintus Aurelius Seneca stood before the Roman Senate with an official complaint. His nephew, a junior gladiator, had been beaten by his trainer for refusing the customary reward after a victory. The nephew claimed that Maximus's example had inspired him. The trainer insisted he was simply enforcing proper Roman values. It was a minor case, barely worth Senate attention, except for one critical thing. It forced Rome's most powerful men to publicly acknowledge a practice that everyone knew existed but nobody ever discussed openly. Senate records, heavily sanitized versions that survived, mention only a debate about the appropriateness of certain customs regarding defeated female captives. That sterile phrase concealed a a political battle. The conservative faction invoked tradition. The reformist faction, influenced by Stoic philosophy, countered that Rome was creating martyrs rather than intimidating enemies. But the true catalyst wasn't morality. It was imperial survival. 3 provincial governors had reported increases in revolts, each citing Rome's treatment of captive women as propaganda fuel for resistance movements. Rome wasn't frightening its enemies anymore. It was radicalizing them. On October 1, 79 AD, the Senate passed what historians later called the Lex Captiva, the law of captive women. Its terms were limited but unprecedented. Female prisoners of war could not be distributed as public rewards in arena settings. Public humiliation of conquered women was banned in official spectacles. Private exploitation continued behind closed doors. Enforcement was unreliable, and many arena managers found loopholes, but the principle stood. Even Rome had discovered public limits. 3 months later, Gaius Valerius Maximus earned his freedom, not for kindness, but for winning 5 consecutive bouts. His last recorded act as a free man was purchasing the freedom of a Dacian woman named Comescos. Historians strongly suspect she was the same woman who had stood beside Sabina on the arena floor. His single act of defiance had saved one woman for a handful of days, nothing more. It changed nothing for the thousands who came before or the thousands who came after. In 2018, archaeologists from the University of Rome excavated a forgotten section of the Eastern Hypogeum. What they discovered never appeared in tourist brochures. A cluster of small chambers with iron restraints built directly into walls, drainage channels carved into stone floors, desperate scratch marks made by human hands. Carbon dating confirmed these rooms dated from the original construction in 80 AD, meaning they were built intentionally, not added later. 6 bronze tags were recovered, stamped with the word Captiva and dates spanning 79 to 82 AD, the exact years of the Dacian suppression. The tragedy isn't merely that Rome was cruel. Cruelty defined ancient warfare everywhere. The true tragedy is that Rome industrialized it, standardized it with paperwork and architectural planning, turned it into a system so complete that people disappeared into it without leaving any trace except scratches on stone. Rome engineered aqueducts that survived 2,000 years, yet simultaneously built chambers beneath its stadiums where human beings were violated as casually as stage props. Its brilliance and its moral emptiness existed side by side without contradiction. The line separating civilization from barbarism has never been measured by marble temples or paved roads, but by how a society treats those with absolutely no power at all. And on that measure, Rome's monuments cast very long shadows indeed. So here's the question that matters, the one that connects ancient Rome to every society that has existed since. When does entertainment cross the line into something unforgivable? When does tradition become an excuse for cruelty? And how many of us, standing in that arena, would have had the courage to refuse? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because these questions didn't die with the Roman Empire. They're still being asked today, in different forms, in different places, wherever power meets powerlessness and crowds gather to watch.